Okay, I think we will give it a start now. So welcome to everyone who has joined us this morning for the workshop, which is part of ICES's Winter Forum. And today we're going to talk to you about transforming Ontario's COVID-19 research evidence into policy. And we're looking forward to sharing our experience with you about work we've been doing throughout the pandemic. And we've set this up so that we will run through some slides which tell you about our experience and what we've been doing, and then we're leaving time for discussion, and we have some discussion questions. So before we launch into this, I'd like to introduce my co-presenters. So with me today is Erika Runions-MacNeil, who is the manager of the Research Planning and Management Unit in the Research Analysis and Evaluation Branch in the Ministry of Health. I'm the director of the branch, and Erika and I work very closely together on these initiatives. Also with us today is Charles Victor, who is Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships and Digital Services at ICES, and has been a very close partner throughout the work we've been doing on the Ontario Health Data Platform and the Challenge Question Initiative, which is what we're going to talk to you about today. So thanks to my co-presenters for joining today. And also I would like to acknowledge that the work we're presenting today is really the result of many people's efforts. So not only, the efforts of our broader team at the Research Analysis and Evaluation Branch, but also the team at ICES and others that are associated with the OHDP. And then, of course, we have included examples from, of real live research projects, challenge question initiatives that, represent the work of those individuals. So, this presentation is really are telling the story of a whole lot of different people's efforts. And we look forward to having some conversation with you at the end about, your thoughts and ideas in relation to this work. So without further ado, then we will launch in. So basically, what we want to talk to you about today. Oh, sorry, I'm going to go back and give a few housekeeping tips. Sorry, I was supposed to do that. Basically, if you could, this is running sort of like a normal Zoom meeting. And we do have, like right now, I see 59 participants. So what we're asking is that you remain muted throughout the presentation. At the end of the presentation, when we get to the discussion questions, we're going to ask you to put your questions in the chat. You can put questions in the chat throughout the presentation if you would like. We probably won't address them until the end. If you want to make a comment to somebody, that is not intended for the broader audience's benefit, you can use the private function in chat where you can, chat with somebody directly using the private function. So that's how we're going to try to sort of manage with such a large group. And thank you for your cooperation there. And so I think that's all the housekeeping I have. And so now we can launch in. Okay, so what are we here to talk about? So we really want to talk to you about the work that the COVID pandemic has allowed us to do to advance on something which I think we all have been really, hoping to do better on, which is, you know,
And you're on mute.
And
All of a sudden.
how long have I been on mute?
Just
Just a
for
few minutes.
2 seconds.
Oh my God. I'm like, what? Was I on mute that whole time? No, I don't know how that happened. Okay. Anyway, right. So the point here is, how do we actually do better at getting evidence research directly to the people who can actually make use of it? And, I assume everyone who's come to this session has some experience or orientation to this, this challenge. And, I would say that the COVID-19 pandemic, that, one of the silver linings has been that we have had new opportunities and significant opportunities to make progress in this area. And so, the coming together, and I also have the privilege of being a member of several of the COVID-19 technical tables that are informing the pandemic response. And so, I've really seen firsthand how, the pandemic really has strengthened the relationships between the research and evidence world and decision makers associated with the pandemic. So we're going to tell you our specific story about the Ontario Health Data Platform and the Challenge Question Initiative, and how these initiatives are really allowing us to accelerate the research into action sort of approach. So here is really just, this is our overarching approach at the Research Analysis and Evaluation branch. We do a number of things, and we, actually several years ago had adopted, what I would describe as an integrated knowledge translation approach. So trying to really engage, get researchers and health system knowledge users together to engage and partner in meaningful ways. And so through our work, we have developed this framework, which really helps to describe, in fact, all of the work of my branch. Some of you may be familiar with the evidence updates that we've been producing through the evidence synthesis unit. That's a really good example of a push strategy where we're trying to proactively put evidence into the hands of health system knowledge users. That product now goes to a wide range of folks right across the health system. So that has been a very effective tool. We get lots of positive feedback about it. The pull strategies, involve like our internal consultancy services, where we get a steady stream of requests from ministry knowledge users, but now, beyond the ministry to other ministries and the health sector at large, requests for support with evaluation work, with evidence synthesis work, with economic analysis work, support for finding existing research projects, for connecting, with research projects, and also for generating new funded research. So we do get a lot of requests. And then the Connects strategy is the best example is the one we're going to go through today, which is the Challenge Question Initiative, where we are deliberately trying to foster those connections between researchers and health system knowledge users to try to accelerate the process of evidence into action. So that is the broader frame which guides all of the work of our branch now, and these examples that we're going to go through are going to help to bring it to life for you. So specifically on the Challenge Questions Initiative, so this arose last summer in response to a real interest actually from the current government around this idea of accelerating our ability to get evidence into the hands of the decision makers in the pandemic. So with the launching of the Ontario Health Data Platform, we were asked to also, basically establish this new Challenge Question Initiative so that we would be, doing that acceleration work in real time. So that's what we're going to tell you about this morning. We have some, I'm going to tell you some of the basics about what the program is about, and then Erika is going to take you through some of the examples of what's been happening since we launched the program, and Charles is going to talk about the Ontario Health Data Platform and the results that are now coming from the data platform. So anyway, the Challenge Questions is an integrated knowledge translation program. It's not a research grant funding program. It's really different in this respect. And, it has taken us a while to kind of orient people to this new style of program where, what we're expecting is that researchers come with their already existing work, which may or may not be funded by a grant, and but they have some support and way to get their research done. By the time they come to the Challenge Questions, it's really about how that work is going to be connected in and be hopefully influential in this case, it's all about the COVID pandemic. And so this is really, I guess, been, the biggest sort of new style of program that we have done in recent years. It's open to those who are engaged in the Ontario Health Data Platform, but also to those who are not necessarily involved in the data platform. So we realized early on that, not every question that we need to answer is going to require, secondary data analysis or the kind of work that is going on in the platform. So we wanted to make sure that we opened the opportunity to all researchers. The benefits at the moment include prioritized access to the data platform if you are in that stream. But I think, what we're relying on mostly here is the intrinsic motivation of researchers to want to make a difference and to want to see their work, translated or taken up in some meaningful way by decision makers. And we have seen some of those examples already, which is very exciting, and we'll tell you about those things. But we're always looking for new ideas for how we can reward the research community for participating in this type of program. So this is our dashboard for the Challenge Questions, and it really just gives you an idea of the level of interest. So we do have now approximately 30 expressions of interest, and about half of them are in the OHDP stream and half of them are in the general stream. We have projects that cover all of the research areas, but you can see that there are quite a few in the health equity and vulnerable populations area, which is also reflected in the OHDP work writ large. And you can see the range of organizations that are participating. One of the key objectives that we have for both the data platform and the challenge questions is to broaden the range of institutions that can access data and that can engage in these types of programs. So we're pleased to see that that is, really beginning to happen. So the next two slides are, and I'm not going to kind of go through each of these areas. You can sort of read about them and get the gist, but we have, so there's 4 on this slide and 3 more categories here. So we basically have 7 research areas within which we have specific challenge questions. This, in a way, is the most important part, or one of the most important parts of this process, because if we can't understand what knowledge users actually are trying to understand or need to know, then we can't generate the right mix of researchers to be participating. So we spent quite a bit of time, actually from the very beginning of the pandemic. My branch had started something which we call the the COVID-19 Research Priorities Framework. And that became a very iterative sort of document that we shopped around to all the COVID tables, many partners in the system, PHO, the Ministry, Ontario Health, and really tried to capture what we understood were the research priorities. We used that research priorities framework to help the Ministry of Colleges and Universities adjudicate their rapid research fund in COVID-19. We've used it in a variety of different ways. But we then took the research priorities framework and we said, well, this is really too broad for the challenge questions. So we did another round of consultation and sort of refinement to come up with what are now the challenge questions that you can see on the website, which we'll make sure that you have the link for. But these are more specific. The questions are more specific than in the research priorities framework, but not so specific as to, rule out interesting ideas that, we wanted to allow scope for interesting ideas to come forward, that may not be, addressing a very, very specific question. So kind of getting the pitch of, level of specificity in these questions was really challenging, but very critical to making sure that we were going to generate the right sort of activity. And I'm very, pleased to say that these questions have held up over time. So I feel like we did a pretty good job of capturing, of kind of getting that right level and pitch so that, they could stand the test of time to some extent. We will update them periodically, but so far we haven't really needed to update them, which I think is really good. And of course, all the questions are required to address, or we encourage to address population subgroups, and that's defined in the more detailed articulation. So I think this is my last slide. So just in a nutshell, there's a pretty, straightforward process in play here, where folks have to submit an expression of interest. And there's the website link. Once we receive the expression of interest, we then try to match you to a health system knowledge user. The health system knowledge user does not have to be in the ministry. We work with Ontario Health, we work with Public Health Ontario and others. And then we facilitate, initial engagement meeting and kind of go from there depending on what the people need. Some people can, after the initial meeting, they can sort of run with it and they establish their own relationship. Some of them were doing multiple expressions of interest that have the same knowledge user. So in some cases, we're sparking some really interesting connections even between researchers. So some of those may need a little bit more of our time in the beginning. And then once, they do their work and all that sort of comes together, then we have a summary of findings form, which we're, asking the researcher then to submit, which is, the emphasis is on, what were the actionable insights, asking them to do plain language kind of summaries so that all of this can be easily understood by a wide range of audiences. And then, stage 4 is, as this is still a relatively new program. So we do have 3 that have submitted summary of findings. And now we're just at the stage of working with those 3 to kind of figure out what's next. How do we properly recognize their work? And, how do we take next steps if there are appropriate next steps? So, the idea is to actually continue, fostering the uptake of whatever the ideas or work that was generated. So I think at this point, Erika, if you're okay, I will hand over to you for the next set of slides.
There we go. Sorry, small technical challenge there. Thank you, Anne. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you this morning to speak about this initiative. I'm going to start with a few observations about the process so far and then highlight some of the push, pull, and connects activities that have been planned or are currently underway. And then I'll spend some time walking through a few examples of our existing projects and their impact. Excuse me. So, and Anne's been speaking about this already in the introductory remarks. There really is a significant amount of effort underway in Ontario's research community to use research and data analytics to help solve these urgent questions related to the COVID-19 response. And there's new projects that are emerging all the time. We see that this challenge question initiative and also the Ontario Health Data Platform is a real opportunity to enhance that existing research and to harness that research and bring it to action. Anne's mentioned a little bit about where we are in this process. So we do have a number of expressions of interest that have already been submitted that are active. And the majority of these researchers have now been matched with knowledge users and they're participating in engagement meetings. And as Anne mentioned, well, it suggests that there have been 13 engagement meetings. That really represents a number of groups coming together. We have had some single interactions with one researcher and a number of knowledge users, but typically we'll bring researchers together with a number of different knowledge users as well. So it becomes very didactic and integrated in the kinds of conversations. Excuse me. So if we think back to the challenge for this session, how do we make research directly relevant to policymakers? How do we decrease time from research initiation to policy implementation? What we're learning from the Challenge Question Initiative is through bringing researchers and knowledge users together and focusing research on questions directly related to policy, that what we're finding is that we're able to make a difference on this traction and this challenge in particular. Researchers are benefiting from information from policy makers to right-size their solutions that are better able to be implemented based on that connection in the earlier stages. Connections are being made to tables of influence to bring research to action, as Anne has mentioned. Researchers are also learning and collaborating with other researchers working in the same area, and in some cases linking machine learning projects with traditional research projects, which is creating some contagion and better scope of response to the challenges. From the knowledge user perspective, they're really benefiting from research that is meeting their direct evidence needs and challenges. When there's a good fit between the researcher and the knowledge user, this connection is even greater. So the more that researchers are really targeting their responses in relationship to the actual challenge questions, we're better able to match with knowledge users and make those really strong connections for folks that are working in this space together. We'll move to the next slide, please.
Sorry.
There we go, thanks, Ed. As Anne mentioned, we're using this integrated knowledge translation solutioning as the guiding principle for this work. And this has really been adopted to enhance the knowledge that is developed and support knowledge sharing more broadly. There are a few activities that I would like to highlight at the bottom of this slide. So under our push activities, we are at this time on a regular basis sharing a summary list of all the challenge question initiatives, expressions of interest, so the projects that have been started or have been submitted in, as well as the OHD projects that are underway. This list goes broadly to our key ministry COVID-19 tables and areas that are focused in on COVID-19, as well as to program areas that are also grappling with how do we respond to COVID-19. So it's really coming at the very senior levels. And that first increases the awareness of the evidence and the research that's available. That's really the first step. So even at those beginning stages, knowing what's going on is valuable. Of course, at the end, it's also bringing those results to bear back to those key tables and making sure that we're making those connections. We will also be both posting the challenge questions and the OHDP projects on the Ontario Health Data Platform website. So there'll be a registry that's created on that site so that everyone can see the projects that are underway. And this will help researchers and the greater public see what activities are happening, and we hope encourage more researchers to join the Challenge Question Initiative. Under our pull activities, we've done something to create a central internal repository for all of the projects in the Challenge Question Initiative. So this creates an interactive site for our knowledge users where they can access all the information in one place. They can see the range of projects that are addressing a particular challenge question or a particular research area within the challenge questions. It includes the project descriptions, the results, dashboards, and ongoing updates. So it really is a live feed to our knowledge users on what's happening in the Challenge Question Initiative and that work, and continuing to make connections. So as our knowledge users are in looking at areas that they might be interested in, then they'll see other projects that might be of interest where they can make further connections. Anne spoke a little bit about the work that we have underway on Connects. We have initiated a number of engagement meetings, and we are planning for upcoming webinars that are focused on COVID-19 projects where results are ready to be shared. And I would just say, you see Anne and myself here, and there are a few other members of our team online as well. And I would just say the key role that the Research Analysis and Evaluation branch plays in the Ministry of Health is making that connection between researchers and knowledge users, and really being able to bridge that divide between those two different groups and help in the translation of that knowledge to get traction in the challenge that we're focused on today. So let's turn to a few examples to see this in action. Next slide. Thank you, Anne. So our first example is in the health equity and vulnerable populations research area. And this is responding to the challenge questions around what are the specific quantifiable impacts of COVID-19 on populations vulnerable to COVID-19. In this particular situation, we pulled together projects that were focused on the impact of COVID-19 on children and youth. And when we shared the expressions of interest with our colleagues in the Ministry of Education, as potential knowledge users, they were thrilled. They were thrilled because the projects were directly addressing their needs to better understand the impact on this population and to help with their education planning. So we had an immediate connection and a really good starting of interaction between the researchers and the knowledge users. From the researcher perspective, we heard that the discussions around their projects with the knowledge users helped them to understand the ministry priorities, align study objectives and timelines to meet the ministry needs, and facilitated a two-way knowledge mobilization. But it also helped to inform future studies and to build partnerships to facilitate ministry needs being incorporated earlier on in the new study design, and helping to have knowledge users that are also part of future projects as you move forward with other work. Slide 11 provides an example of one of the projects that is looking at the prevalence of COVID-19 exposure among young children and the association with public health measures. Jonathan, the researcher, is actually here with us today and could certainly say maybe a few words about his experience being a part of this initiative and responding to the challenge question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me to just to give a few comments here. I just think it's brilliant that the ministries are interested in partnering with us and helping to exchange knowledge in both directions, both to understand what the needs of the ministries are, and also to help us convey knowledge that we learn directly to the ministries. Our traditional sources for knowledge translation are scientific outputs, including manuscripts and other conference proceedings and other venues, but it takes a while for that knowledge to get into ministry hands. So this is a really brilliant opportunity to do that. So thank you very much to the ministries for thinking about that.
Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate you being here today and sharing some of your thoughts. And if we go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So our second example is in the vaccination strategy research area and responds to the challenge question, what are the factors critical to vaccine targeting? This work, Maxwell Smith's work on the development of an ethical framework for COVID-19 vaccine distribution, began as an expression of interest to the Challenge Questions initiative. His focus initially was on a comparative synthesis of published COVID-19 vaccine prioritization frameworks and matched with a knowledge user in Public Health Ontario and the Office of the Chief Medical Office at the Ministry of Health. Engagement meetings with the knowledge users helped to direct and shape the work and prepared the researcher for participation in the province's COVID-19 vaccine distribution task force. This work has helped to frame vaccination decisions in Ontario and was published at the end of December. And we're happy to share that link as well in relationship to that work. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, our third example is in the therapeutic treatment options and outcomes research area. This was also coupled with health equity and vulnerable populations research area and health system resourcing projects. We brought together 4 different projects that were focused on opioids, drug shortages, and the supply chain. Discussions have led to collaboration among machine learning and traditional researchers and complementary work to respond to the challenge questions. One of the researchers shared that the engagement meetings on opioids was phenomenal and a fantastic resource that has created a working group on the Ontario Health Data Platform on opioids. Key knowledge users that have been accessing this information and working with our researchers come from the Drugs and Devices Division of the Ministry of Health. And here on this slide, you see the results from Mina and Tara's work that has been completed on the launch of a COVID-19 Ontario drug utilization tool, which reports weekly trends in dispensed prescription drugs. This tool provides useful information to the public and a resource for monitoring the impacts of the pandemic on the demand and availability of drugs in Ontario. Next slide, thank you. Our fourth example falls under the health equity and vulnerable populations research area and population level prevention and containment strategies. So you can see through the examples that we're going through that we're really pulling together the research areas and the different projects that have linkages and potential to respond to our knowledge users' varied needs. And when we bring them together, there gets translation across those research areas and the focus of the response and how we sort of approach that from a policy perspective. Here, we had 2 projects focused on long-term care, both on the Ontario Health Data Platform. And as they spoke about their projects, connections were being made on how to integrate the work and extend the work to be relevant to COVID-19 and beyond. A few key features was the building in a focus of the quality of life perspective into the work on COVID-19, which is a key focus for the Ministry of Long-Term Care. And this also was work on this area and these collaborations and discussions helped in looking at the development of a risk stratification tool that would be right-sized to meet the ministry needs for uptake. So the exchange between the researcher and the knowledge user really became, we want to build this risk stratification tool, but we want to know that we're going to build it in a way that can be used and implemented on the ministry side. So the dialogue started to come between how do we do that? What are the factors that are of interest, and how do we really expand and look at something that will be actionable in real time? Both these projects are in the early stages and have welcomed the engagement and input at the beginning of the initiatives and the work for co-development as they move through the projects and the response to these particular challenge questions. Engagements between these researchers and knowledge users are currently ongoing and will continue. And as Anne mentioned, these are very much customized. So where we find that researchers and knowledge users are having good traction together and benefiting from those ongoing dialogues, then we put in more of a series of connections to help support that dialogue. At other times, it might be that the work is fairly progressed and it's presenting those results and being able to share where the work has come and talk about that from the phase of work at a later stage of implementation. And if we move to slide 15, thank you, Anne. Our last example is part of the pandemic waves research area. This work is focused on the sentinel recognition of hotspots of emerging COVID-19. The researcher has been using geographic and time information of documented cases to identify emerging locations as early as possible. This work has helped to inform similar analysis within the ministry, and has been relevant to the COVID-19 modeling table and also our rapid response COVID-19 table. This study has the potential to help evaluate the effectiveness of vaccines or other interventions to reduce the frequency of hotspots in the geospatial context. So it does have a broader scope and implications. So in summary, from these examples and looking forward to our dialogue at the end of our discussion, the Challenge Question Initiative is bringing together researchers and knowledge users in real time to build and strengthen the pathways for translating research into policy and practice in a real responsive, nimble, and innovative way. We really look forward to hearing from you all regarding this work and seeking your advice and input as we continue on this journey. I'll now hand the presentation over to Charles to speak about the Ontario Health Data Platform.
Sam. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Ontario Health Data Platform and more generally about the supports available to researchers in this space, but also the challenge questions. And as Anne and Erika had mentioned, one of the key supports that the ministry has invested in since the beginning of the pandemic is in the creation of the Ontario Health Data Platform, which is really aimed at broadening access to particularly the health administrative data, but certainly there is interest in increasing the amount of data and types of data available to researchers to answer some of these key questions. The ministry has both leveraged existing data repositories at ICS and at Ontario Health, and as well is looking to broaden access to data to researchers using novel research techniques through the creation of a platform at excuse me, Queen's University, which we're calling OHDPQ. So really this investment is a federated data platform, which, as I said, leverages the existing repository at ICS, which we refer to as OHDPI, and is currently building this high performance computing cluster on the Queen's side for specific forms of research. The data access here, you know, as Anne and Erika had mentioned, the challenge questions initiative is open to all researchers, regardless of need for access to secondary data. But the development of this platform really provides researchers who do require access to these data more expedited access. Next slide. And so currently the OHDP has been live since July 15th. OHDP-I has been onboarding both challenge question initiative projects, as well as research projects that are receiving OHDP support. But in addition to that, it's also been onboarding other COVID-related projects, which are really aimed at, or which really leverage the investments that the ministry has made. We have supported the OHDP-Q by ensuring that an initial set of data is in that environment and ready to be analyzed. And the Queen's environment is pretty close to being able to onboard research projects that are appropriate for that environment. And then this last point here is just a reflection of the purpose of the two environments. While the OHDP-I, the ICS environment is sufficient for what we might consider traditional statistical research and can handle some machine learning projects, the OHDP-Q is really engineered to be a very high performance computing site to be able to onboard unique data that might require high computational support. Next slide, please. I think many of you here today are familiar with ICS and the resources, and the purpose of this slide is to reflect what we are leveraging here. We're leveraging, over 100 databases representing 20 million life histories in Ontario. We're leveraging the expertise at OHDP-I with having over 250 scientists publishing, close to 700 publications per year. However, enhancing that, next slide, Anne, please, was key to being able to broaden out access. We've done a number of enhancements to the environment to enable broader access, including rapid onboarding for high priority projects. We can onboard research teams in 10 days or less if required. We're leveraging the status of ICS to be able to provide researchers that typically have not had access to these type of data, to access these data for the purposes of either challenge questions or responding to health system stakeholders. And the example that Erika gave of the Peter Rogan group out of Western Ontario is exactly that. This was a group that typically would not have had access to these data, but we've been able to enable that access to address issues related to the pandemic. Thus far, we've initiated over 140 projects in the environment, with many of those projects directly supporting health system stakeholders, and quite a number of projects being led by non-ICS researchers. In addition to that, our Applied Health Research Question Program, which is very close to the Challenge Question Program. The difference is the knowledge user comes to us as opposed to this matching of knowledge user to researcher. This program has been supporting various tables, COVID-related tables in the province with, for example, weekly updates, weekly reports to the command table. But we're able to leverage that work to then be able to provide, if required, weekly updates of data for researchers. So this investment has been transformational in some aspects for ICS and the OHDPI in order to enable broader and rapid access. A second support that we do provide as well, and if Anne would move on to the next slide, that'd be great, is in assisting researchers with some aspects of the KT process. So for example, as researchers, as OHDP approved projects or ARCs or challenge questions start to produce results, our knowledge KT team and communications team is able to quickly render those into infographics or lay summary findings, lay language summary findings. And these findings often get fed up to tables, even if they are preliminary in nature. Now, because of the public nature of this talk, we've only included completed projects as a few examples here. But often researchers are asked if they would like their results, even preliminary results, presented to the various ministry stakeholders and tables. And we provide these services such as translating these into infographics that can be then used onward. And so this is an example of one of the applied health research questions that looked at immigrants, refugees, and newcomers. And this was, moderately early on in the pandemic, and related to the proportion of COVID cases that they represented. Next slide. Similarly, we had another applied health research question that was done very early on, and this one actually resulted in a research publication, but its primary goal was to estimate hospital surge and ICU capacity early on in the pandemic. So these data were presented to the various tables within that the ministry has struck in order to consolidate and compile evidence towards COVID-19. Next slide. And then this slide represents results from an Ontario Health Data Platform, or OHDP approved research project. Many of you might be familiar with the flattening the curve group, and they have been accessing the ICS data to provide, and in semi-real-time data, to provide information that's publicly available. And they take data from various sources and compile it on their site, and use the ICS data to identify some indicators. And then next slide. I think now, so I think what we really wanted to do now, and I'll let Anne moderate this, but what I think we really wanted to do now is understand from you what approach resonates with you, how can we improve upon this process, and yeah, Anne, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, so great. Thank you, Charles and Erika. I think, we've given you a pretty good overview of some of the work we've been doing in the OHDP and the Challenge Question Initiative. And so we posed a few questions here that, we would love to get some dialogue going. I know there's a lot of people on this, but if we use the chat function, we should be able to manage. So the first question really is, does this approach resonate? And, from both a researcher perspective and a knowledge user perspective, we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. What because we assume that many of you have had experiences in knowledge translation, integrated knowledge translation. What have you found works the best in trying to pursue an integrated knowledge translation approach? Let's hear about your experiences. And what advice have you got for us in improving and expanding on this initiative? We'd love to hear your ideas. We certainly have faced a number of challenges as we've been rolling out the Challenge Question Initiative. And so, we'd love to hear from folks about, your observations or thoughts about how we can continue to advance in this area. Okay, we've got our first question. Janine Paul, has the Challenge Questions program considered bringing in knowledge users beyond the ministries and public health units? That's an excellent question, Janine. We are very open to knowledge users from really all kinds of health system organizations. So one of the things, as I was mentioning at the beginning, traditionally my branch in the ministry has been, our primary and almost singular focus has been supporting folks in the ministry. With the COVID pandemic, we largely, kind of the evidence synthesis work has been at the lead in this respect, where we have connected with organizations all across the health system. So we now have, hospitals that we're working with on evidence synthesis requests. We have even had email exchanges with solo practitioners who receive our evidence update and are, actually taking up what they read in the evidence update. So that has really taught us about the broader range and mix of knowledge users that are out there and who very much need the work that's coming out of all of these initiatives. I would say that Ontario Health has been a big part of being able to reach this broader audience. So now that we have Ontario Health, we have a little bit easier time. We have a mechanism whereby from the ministry, we can easily, through Ontario Health, reach out to that broader audience. So definitely the answer is yes. And we're always looking for, ways that we can facilitate those relationships for sure.
Just going to add to that, and just another comment. We also work very closely with the Ontario Health Teams Division and have initiatives in place to share information in relationship to COVID-19 through this initiative and that work as well, to make sure that information is going through that network in addition to other networks.
So we have a question from the patient perspective. Okay, happy to hear your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Hi, I'm Pierre Leclerc, and for full disclosure, I'm a member of the Public Advisory Council for ICES, and I've been a member for several years. In one of the slides that Ms. Runions-MacNeil showed us, it talked about the push-pull-connect concept. And as it relates specifically to fostering connections, it talks about fostering connections between the researchers, the knowledge users, but you also included the patients in there. And of course, to me, that's very important. I want to just use the analogy of someone guiding a hiking expedition. The rule of thumb is you don't go any faster than your slowest member. for obvious reasons. You don't want to lose that member. You want to ensure that they're safe. So if I could transfer that analogy to the resulting analyses that come from these interactions and the reports that are published subsequent to the applied health research questions results. And I mean no disrespect to anybody within the healthcare field, but if you understand the concept of legalese, I would use the term healthies, in the sense that sometimes, and I've read some of the publications, even the external publications are very health jargon oriented. And using my analogy of a guided expedition, not everybody has a university degree. Not everybody has a high school degree. And so the idea is, when you publish an external result paper, it should be written in simple terms so that anybody can understand what it means. If you're really intent on ensuring that the patient is involved in this process, if you're going to use acronyms, health acronyms, make sure that they're identified as to what they mean. If you're going to use health concepts or medical concepts, make sure those are identified as well. Because otherwise, a person who has the idea of going and looking at a report, if they see a report that's written in what I call healthese, they'll be turned off and they'll never come back. And I don't think that's the purpose of the exercise. We want to be inclusive in ensuring that the patients, who basically are the ones that we're trying to protect and educate, that those reports are presented and written in such a fashion that it's easily understood.
Thank you for that comment. We 110% agree. And my branch is also very much involved in the Strategic Patient-Oriented Research Initiative via CIHR. So we are very on board with patient-oriented research, with patient perspectives built into everything we do. And your emphasis on plain language is also actually relevant for health system knowledge users, because oftentimes researchers speak in ways that folks in the ministry can't understand. So we really agree that a lot of the focus of this work is literally in the translation, right? So how do we get researchers to be able to both communicate but also listen to patients, health system knowledge users, and really create that sort of partnership. I think what our ideal is a partnership between researchers and patients and system knowledge users, so that they understand each other, they can communicate, and through a two-way kind of relationship, we can actually get the solutions to the problems, right? So the challenge questions represent the problems, or what the kind of issues we're trying to address. And then really our focus is in building the partnership, but also, even apart from the folks that might be involved in the partnership, that's the reason, for example, that the summary of findings for the challenge questions, we're asking researchers to write those documents in plain language. So they can still have their publications and things that, they require for their academic, goals and things. But, we want the plain language version, which will be on the website, that anybody could go in and access that and understand what it is that we're talking about. So definitely that's an objective.
Thank
And I
you.
think, absolutely, I'm going to just echo Anne's thoughts here and say that I think the piece that comes along with this is working with others within the ministry and outside the ministry to help in that translation. So in building the materials and the work that goes on, for example, the website, both the ministry website and the Ontario Health Data Platform website, we're working with our comms folks to really understand how do we put this into language that is going to be understandable for multiple populations and multiple groups of stakeholders. And also working with ICS on the infographics is really trying to get to a place where, you know, what is this telling us? How do we understand that in a more effective way? And when we're building our tools, even in relationship to applications for the Ontario Health Data Platform, we're building in sections directly in the application for folks to really work on doing that plain language summary that can then be brought forward to the websites. So I really appreciate your comments and absolutely wholeheartedly agree that it's such a critical piece to have the real connections and all these pieces. So thank you for that.
So any more comments or questions? I guess what, you know, what I would say in terms of some of the challenges that we face, you know, they're not new, I'm sure, to many of you, but it has been very challenging to actually get health system knowledge users to be able to dedicate the time that is needed to start this work. Everyone is like extremely busy, even more so now with the pandemic. And so we've had to be somewhat persistent in identifying and connecting knowledge users. But then what we find is once you get them engaged and they actually hear that, oh, this researcher might actually be able to help me solve something that I'm working on, all of a sudden the engagement becomes easier, more, you know, more sort of free flowing. And so one of the things that we're really looking for thoughts and ideas on is, you know, how we can do that early phase, you know, smarter, you know, more efficiently, kind of, because so far it's taken just basically a lot of sort of trial and error and try, you know, we have to first kind of figure out, well, who is likely to be interested in this project? And then, you know, try to get their attention, try to, you know, start to forge the partnership. And of course, we have people in the ministry who are more experienced at this. So we have, you know, some program areas who have deep working relationships with researchers. And so we can see, you know, how that relationship looks at maturity. And we understand that, but really what we face in sort of the immediate challenge is how to kind of bring the knowledge users along, you know, and get them to that point where they realize this is going to solve a problem for me. I'm willing to engage and spend the time. So that's definitely one of our key challenges. The other challenge is in, you know, continuing to orient the research community to the idea that this is a program specifically dedicated to translation, and you know that you know that it's a good thing and it can help the researcher and their career and all these other goals that the researcher might have to engage and to be flexible and to be responsive to whatever the knowledge user says, you know, that they need, because we assume that in this relationship, you know, the researchers are going to listen and maybe adapt their approach depending on what the knowledge user has said. So this is kind of, you know, the challenges on both sides. And you know, we're always interested in ideas to, you know, help us in managing through some of those challenges. Folks are being shy. Perhaps intimidated by the size of the audience.
Come on, people, ask some questions. Are you serious? Oh, crap. What's wrong with you people?
Hi, Anne. It's Janine again. Just to bridge the silence a little bit.
Thank you.
No problem. And I don't know why people are being so quiet, but I will say that, I mean, the challenges that you are facing, that you've described, are all too familiar to all of us who are trying to do, definitely on a probably less urgent pace, but the idea of, you know, how do you make this relationship appeal to knowledge users is all too familiar to people working in the IKT space. And I think that, you know, it's so tricky to figure out how to pitch the idea that there's value in that relationship at the beginning when the relationship itself is built from the dialogue, right? So understanding how the research can be shaped from their own interests and input is something that almost you have to do to understand why it's valuable. So the only thought that I might have would be, you know, you've had some really phenomenal examples here, and potentially using the knowledge users that you already have as champions to demonstrate what great, you know, success they've had understanding their community and delivering services better because of that relationship. And Erika and I was happy to talk about, you know, some ideas that we have offline as well. And then on the other side, the KT piece with the researcher side, I think that everybody feels that as well. Like, it's a lot of work to do plain language dialogues. It's a lot of work to add in, you know, the effort to take all your research and make it into a place that's accessible and continuously take an input into your project. So that's all too familiar. I think we're all struggling with the same. So just to say, you're not alone, and you know, we feel similarly too.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Janine, and I think your idea about the champions is an excellent one, because we have recognized, you know, that there, as I said, there are some areas of the ministry that have very mature relationships with researchers. So we do have some of those that we can build on. The other thing we're doing, and it's fairly early stages for this, but we realized that, you know, as part of that brokering role, you know, sometimes it's just, it's partly navigation, right? So, you know, I've always felt that I was pretty good at navigating the ministry because, you know, it's basically part of our job. But now, you know, we're finding we have to navigate more widely than just the ministry. And so what we decided to do, because we get projects that are relevant to Ontario Health, to Public Health Ontario, and even beyond. So we're starting to build what we're calling a network of challenge question liaisons. So we're starting with Ontario Health and Public Health Ontario, where we will have a person in those organizations who knows their organization very well. And so we can go to them and say, we think this project is relevant to Ontario Health, but we don't know exactly who in the organization it might be best for. So by starting to build that network of liaisons, we're hoping that that also helps to extend, you know, not only our reach, but also the building up of champions more broadly. So we got some questions in the chat, comments and questions. So Allison Papricia, you mentioned that the challenge questionnaires have remained relatively unchanged as the pandemic has progressed. I'm wondering if you are seeing any hints of future changes, or perhaps ways that the existing questions might need to be broken down, e.g. wondering about questions specifically related to the pandemic and mental health under the treatment and outcomes area? That's a great question or comment. I guess it's more of a question, but yes. Actually, so I would say two things. The interesting thing was when I remember when we were writing them and we knew we wanted this vaccine strategy section. And, you know, last summer, like people were like, yeah, we think we're going to have a vaccine, but are we really? And blah, blah, like there was still a lot of uncertainty. And we had some voices saying, it's too early to put that vaccine strategy area in. Well, I'm glad that we put it in because now it's one of, you know, the hottest areas of the work. In terms of pandemic response or pandemic waves, obviously the variants have sort of really taken over a lot of the focus in the modeling work and so on. So yes, we probably need, particularly in the pandemic waves area, and I think that's where probably there's been some of the biggest shifts that we couldn't have necessarily foreseen when we were writing in the summer. And then there is some stuff under mental health in there, certainly in the research priorities framework, but I think your point is well taken that, you know, we have been thinking the challenge questions have stood up fairly well to this point, but yes, we need to continually fine tune them to keep the program fresh and relevant. So for sure, that is going to be on our agenda coming up pretty soon. And, you know, we're also, this is the other thing that we're happy to engage with people on, the questions themselves. So if you go on our website and you have ideas about the questions themselves, like, again, as I said, the process of developing the questions was a very consultative, iterative process itself. And we are interested to keep that, you know, going. So please don't hesitate to give us feedback also on the questions. We have another question. So this work you're doing with IKT is really great. Do you think this work will studied at some point, specifically speaking about adding to the science of KT itself, really looking at how effective the strategies were? That is a great point. And we would love to study this. I would say our capacity right now to do that is fairly limited, but if, you know, folks have ideas about that, like we're happy to follow up with you offline. Like I think, you know, we feel that this should be studied because, you know, it's been a unique opportunity actually, and to really, you know, be able to step back and understand, like right now we're too immersed in just trying to do it and trying to, you know, bring it to life and kind of make it happen. But we recognize the importance of evaluating and studying it. So we'd be really interested in conversations about that. That comment was from, oh, I'm sorry, I can't say, that looks like a combination of name. Anyway, please follow up with us because we'd love to chat with you. Sabella. Okay, thank you for that, Sabella. We'd love to hear more from you on that. Okay, Andrea Gershon, congratulations on trying new approaches. I realize it's early days, but is there, yeah, evaluation plan for the program. So same comment. We don't have, except for, well, I should say, there is a plan to evaluate the Ontario Health Data Platform. And so we're working with our colleagues in the Information Management and Strategy branch to try to bring forward an evaluation plan. And the Challenge Question Initiative, you know, can be sort of part of that, but really the main focus of the data platform work is a little bit different to I mean, the evaluation will be looking at, some different aspects as well. So I think, my preference would be that the challenge questions initiative kind of has its own evaluation, and we need to definitely think about that and get on to that.
Just going to add one more comment too, in
Please.
relationship to Allison's points. So just also highlighting back to Anne's introductions on the fact that the integrated knowledge translation approach is something that we embody across the work that we do within the branch. And we also have invested in 12 mental health and addictions COVID-19 research projects, a number of those co-funded through CHR. So we will be looking at the linkages between the work on mental health and addictions in relationship to COVID-19, the potential connections around the challenge questions initiative, and also the work on the OHDP. So being in this central location where we have these connections, we're able to sort of look at all the work in the space that's going on in relationship to research in COVID-19. And in early days, we had done some mapping against our COVID-19 research priorities framework and the different areas of work that were happening across in this space. So it is a labor of love, and definitely an initiative to try and make those connections across all the different pieces that we're doing, both from investing in funding and also the responsiveness that we're doing from our evidence synthesis work and our economic analysis and evaluation work within the branch.
And
Yep.
this is Charles. So, given there's a small amount of time left, COVID-19 will end. We hope, or at least be under control. So the pandemic aspect of it will end. But I think this is a really great initiative, the challenge question, and again, from my perspective, we're used to kind of the ARC process where the knowledge user comes to us as opposed to the researcher being married with the knowledge user. So given that COVID-19 is likely to end or calm down, do you see this initiative continuing?
I definitely think this, I mean, as with so many aspects of our COVID work, this permanently changes the way we do things. It's been an interesting experience for the research branch because I think COVID has actually been good, not only for the research branch, but the research community generally, in that, the pandemic has really highlighted the importance of research and evidence and the importance of timely research and evidence. And so, I think we have really changed like our work program. The core and the principles have been there, but the opportunity to apply those principles in new ways has really been amazing with COVID. So that's been the silver lining for us. And I think definitely it stays like everything we're learning about how to do this integrated knowledge translation approach, that definitely will stay beyond COVID. I think our ability to reach out beyond the ministry, that has been a revelation, and to realize how in some parts of the health system, folks are starved for evidence, like almost literally. Like we take for granted because we work in the space, we're kind of, we have access to all of it, but we have discovered nooks and crannies where they are just so grateful for every little sort of service that we can provide. So some of these, and also through the COVID tables, like we have seen really this deepening of the interactions between researchers and, you know, the system that, you know, like we haven't seen before. So definitely this is for keeps. And, you know, that's why we're, you know, we're just really interested in, you know, trying to hear thoughts and ideas about how we continue to do this better and better, because this is definitely the way for the future.
Great, thanks.
Okay, well, I think we're pretty almost to time. I don't know if I'm watching the chat. I don't see any new questions coming through. So I don't know if you have final thoughts, Erika or Charles, that you'd like to share before we wrap up.
My only final thought is that we're all ears, that we hope people will reach out. This has been very much a learning experience, and we continue to learn. But the goal is to expedite evidence into the hands of policymakers. And so, if you have any suggestions, please feel free to reach out.
Mm-hmm. And absolutely, you know, you can reach out through our research unit account. There's a central account for folks to respond to. Happy to share that. And also, please do keep an eye out on the Ontario Health Data Platform website for new updates and new information, as well as on the ministry's research pages, which have been refreshed to reflect the current work within the Ministry of Health on research. So I'm very much pleased to have been able to have this discussion with you all today, and thank you.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you again to my co-presenters, to all of the folks that are represented by this work, and you know, to all of you who came to hear about this. We have one question now coming in from Bajini. I think that's, anyway, majority of the challenge questions are in the field of health equity. Would love to know if you would consider IKT that include community engagement, or if that is already being conducted. Another really excellent question. Yes, we actually have another piece of work that's underway at the moment, again, with our OHDP partners at ICES, where we're looking at how do we operationalize a bunch of advice that has been coming from different sort of, you know, organizations and voices, you know, and that will allow us to really feel confident that the equity work that happens either on the platform or through the Challenge Question Initiative is respectful, appropriate, responsive to you know, the needs and perspectives of those communities that are, you know, that the work is focused on. So, you know, a long-winded way of saying, yes, community engagement is a key component of that, along with other aspects. And we are very actively working on trying to create a scheme that would basically sit around the OHDP and the challenge questions, and would be quite clear to researchers about what the expectations are if they are doing work in the equity space. You know, what do we actually expect them to do in order to be respectful and responsive to those communities? So would love to hear, you know, more ideas from you. You know, follow up with us if you want, but we are definitely you know, focused on that as well. Great. Well, that was a great question, because that is a huge issue for us. And as you can see, there were a lot of equity questions. Okay, well, then I think we're probably out of wrap. I'm just watching to see if any more last minute questions come up, but yeah, Awesome. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for coming today. And we will see you around. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.